There are two important laws we must study when we introduce the concept of society. One is traditionally known as the law of the division of labor, and the other is Ricardo's law of association. On the law of the division of labor, let's recall what we've already discussed. I'm not going to go any further than that. To begin with, the name is incorrect. However, it has become thoroughly accepted since the time of Adam Smith, the division of labor. The modern concept of economics requires the name of the law be modified. The law of the division of knowledge, or of information. As we saw, human beings realize entrepreneurially that they benefit if each person specializes in the tasks in which he or she has a comparative advantage. I offered the example of a movie, Jeremiah Johnson. Each person finds an activity in which he has a comparative advantage. And if he specializes in that activity and exchanges the results of his effort for those of the other person who specializes in a different activity, together they benefit. So there is a horizontal and vertical division of knowledge. And I explained that the division of labor can only increase if it is supported by an ever larger number of human beings. To put it another way, the necessary condition for economic development is a constant increase in the population. Many people have found that surprising. Listen, Professor, it's the other way round. The more of us there are, the poorer we are. No, we can be many and rich, or few and poor. Those are the alternatives. Poverty has never resulted from population growth. Poverty results from socialism, as we will see when the time comes. The thing is, you interpret socialism in political terms. If you prefer, say poverty results from statism, that is, from hindering the spontaneous process of social cooperation. I don't care which party is responsible. There are parties on the right that are far more socialist than those on the left. It makes no difference. They're practically all the same. Why make distinctions? In the 19th century, there was an English economist named David Ricardo, who was descended from a Jewish family that had been expelled from Spain. At the dawn of economic science, this English economist began to theorize about international trade, and he drew the same conclusion we have just drawn regarding interactions between human beings. But he focused on exchanges between different countries, on international trade. Well, his conclusion was that countries benefit if each specializes in the area where it has a comparative advantage. It's just like I was saying before. Human beings benefit if each specializes in the tasks in which he has a comparative advantage, and then exchanges the products of his effort for those of the other person. What is true for individuals is true for nations. It's curious that economists first arrived at this law intuitively in a different sphere, that of international trade. Indeed, Spain has sun, and it produces oranges. But try going to the United Kingdom or Poland. It rains all day long, and it's freezing cold. Or northern Germany. There's no way to grow an orange there. However, the United Kingdom has coal mines, and with the Industrial Revolution, the iron and steel industry emerged, and the country began to produce machinery and capital equipment. Well, Ricardo's theory is, we English people should concentrate on building machines, and the Spanish on making wines, because the sherry is wonderful, as is the port wine, and the oranges are fantastic. So, the cheapest way for Spain to buy machinery is to plant oranges, and the cheapest way for England to get oranges is to build ships. Just think what it would cost to plant oranges in England. A fortune. The English would have to build huge greenhouses, heat them, blow on the clouds so the sun would come out once in a while. An impossible task. And the cheapest way to get machinery and oranges in Switzerland is to build watches. Imagine living in Switzerland. The Swiss can't even come out of the house for 7 months of the year because they're snowed in. Well, if you were stuck in the house, bored with nothing to do, you might build a little watch. And that explains the advantages of free trade. Everyone comes out ahead. This is simply a rough application to the aggregate of nations of the principles we have already studied in class regarding human interaction between individuals. Now, Ricardo took a step further and asked himself, what happens if a country is more efficient than another in all lines of production? Imagine a country with a comparative advantage in everything. Would it still be worthwhile to make an exchange? would international trade still be worthwhile? The circumstances we've just considered do not apply. The answer is quite obvious in that case. Spain is more efficient at growing oranges, England at making iron and steel products, and Switzerland at building watches. But what happens if a country is more efficient than another at producing oranges, watches, and iron and steel products? Would an exchange still be in the country's interest? Yes or no? Ricardo concludes that it would, that even in those circumstances, exchanges are worthwhile, that countries benefit if each specializes in the area in which it has the greatest relative, that's the key term, comparative advantage. Though David Ricardo never knew it, Mises referred to the universal version of the law of the division of labor, or of knowledge, as the Ricardian Law of Association, in Ricardo's honor. That explains the title of this section in the textbook, In Human Action. What does it mean to specialize in the area in which one has the greatest relative comparative advantage? Of course, in our hypothesis, we are assuming one country surpasses the rest in all lines, but not necessarily with the same intensity. If one country is overwhelmingly more efficient than the rest in certain lines, in other lines, substantially more efficient, in others, more efficient, and in others, slightly more efficient, Ricardo discovered that it is in that country's interest to devote itself solely to that activity at which it is overwhelmingly more efficient, and leave the other lines to the other countries, and make exchanges. By extrapolation, I give you a very clear example to show what is truly important in human interactions. The example went like this. Suppose a surgeon is 1,000 times better at performing operations than his anaesthetist and nurses. But it turns out he's also the best anaesthetist, though he's only 100 times better at administering anesthetics than his anaesthetist. And also, God's given him the gift, he's a fabulous nurse and assistant. But he's only twice as good at that than the people helping him. The law says it's best for that surgeon to devote himself entirely to performing operations. It's true that the anaesthetist who assists him will not do as good a job as he would if he did it himself, and the nurse who assists him will not do as good a job as he would if he did it himself. But it's no less true that he frees up time by allowing the anaesthetist and the nurse to help him, even though they don't do as good a job. And if he devotes all the time he saves to performing operations, at which his relative advantage is far greater, that is in relative terms, and he makes exchanges with others, everyone comes out ahead. This is a marvelous law, because it tells us why the process of social interaction exists. In other words, it explains why we each have our niche in the process of social cooperation. Even the least gifted, the least educated in terms of scientific knowledge, even disabled people, everyone comes out ahead in a globalized process of voluntary exchange, in which each person devotes himself to the activity in which he has the greatest relative comparative advantage. I think I offered the example, because I offer it every year, of the TV series LA Law, which was about a law firm. Well, the firm hired an intellectually disabled person as an office assistant to transport the mail from one place to another and to pass out the coffee. And in fact, he wasn't very skilled at it, but he did it. The president of the firm would have been far more skilled at the job. The president could have done it in 5 minutes. But it is actually of relative importance whether the assistant takes 10 minutes instead of 5 to pass out the coffee, or he delivers the mail all throughout the morning. The president doesn't have to worry about those tasks anymore, and he can devote himself entirely to winning cases. He gives a job to someone who appears to be less capable, but who can then earn a living. The president and the assistant do each other a favor. Both benefit. This is Ricardo's Law of Association, which explains why we are all spontaneously working together in the process of social cooperation, which is society. So, hats off to David Ricardo. By the way, this law is one of the few things, I almost said the only thing, I agree with him on, and hats off to Mises for having developed the law.